The wagon rattled to a stop, and Marlo Bennett knew. This was the moment her family finally succeeded in throwing her away. The rancher stepping down from his porch wasn't supposed to meet her. He'd paid for Celeste, the beautiful one, the golden daughter everyone adored. But Marlo's father had shoved her onto that wagon instead, pocketing the money and dumping his embarrassment into someone else's life. Now Rhett Mercer stared at her like she was livestock that didn't match the bill of sale. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far Marlo's story travels. And hit that like button, because this gets brutal. The wind cut across the Montana plains like it had a personal grudge against anything trying to survive out there. Marlo pressed her spine against the wagon bed, fingers numb where they gripped the splintered wood, and watched the only world she'd ever known disappear behind a wall of dust. Her father hadn't even looked back. 3 days of rattling across frozen earth, and Jacob Wells, the driver her family had hired, hadn't spoken more than 20 words to her. He drove like she was cargo. Hay bales, fence posts, something that didn't require conversation or common decency. Marlo didn't blame him. She'd stopped expecting either years ago. The ranch appeared on the horizon just after dawn on the 4th day, a sprawling collection of buildings that looked like they'd been carved out of the landscape itself. Raw, functional, built by someone who didn't waste time on anything that wasn't necessary for survival. Raven Spur Ranch. The name alone had a weight to it, something hard and unyielding. Marlo's mother had whispered it like a curse when the arrangements were being made. That man up north, she'd said, voice dripping with disdain even as she counted the money he'd sent. Rhett Mercer. They say he's brutal. Built that ranch with his bare hands and doesn't suffer fools or weakness. Her mother had smiled when she said it, actually smiled, like the idea of shipping Marlo off to someone brutal was a solution rather than a cruelty. The wagon lurched over the final stretch of road, and Marlo's stomach twisted itself into knots that had nothing to do with the motion. She smoothed down the front of her dress, the nicest one she owned, which wasn't saying much, and tried to swallow the taste of panic climbing up her throat. This wasn't supposed to be her. The deal had been simple. Rhett Mercer needed a wife. He'd sent a letter, a photograph of his ranch, and enough money to make Marlo's father actually pay attention for once in his miserable life. He'd wanted Celeste. Everyone always wanted Celeste, and why wouldn't they? Her younger sister looked like something out of a painting, golden hair that caught sunlight like it was performing, blue eyes that made grown men stumble over their own boots, a smile that could convince people to hand over things they couldn't afford to lose. Marlo, on the other hand, looked like the definition of fine. Brown hair that didn't do anything interesting. Gray eyes that her mother once described as muddy. A face that was perfectly acceptable and entirely forgettable. "You're plain," her mother had told her once, matter of fact, the way someone might mention the weather. "Not ugly, thank goodness, but plain. You'll need to compensate with other qualities." Marlo had been 12. She'd spent the next 8 years trying to figure out what those other qualities might be, working herself half to death on her father's land, learning to fix things and manage things and handle things that would have broken Celeste's perfect fingernails. She'd convinced herself that usefulness might be worth something, that competence could earn the kind of respect beauty got handed for free. She'd been wrong. 2 weeks ago, her father had called her into his study with an expression she couldn't read. For one stupid, hopeful moment, Marlo had thought maybe he was finally going to acknowledge something she'd done. Thank her for keeping the household accounts balanced, or the livestock fed, or any of the 1,000 things she handled while Celeste practiced her embroidery. Instead, he'd said, "You're going to Montana." Just like that, casual. Like he was sending her to town for supplies. Rhett Mercer sent for Celeste, he'd continued, not quite meeting her eyes. "But your mother and I have decided you'll go instead." The words hadn't made sense at first. Marlo had stood there, stupid and frozen, waiting for the rest of the sentence that would make it make sense. It never came. "Celeste is too valuable to waste on some rancher in the middle of nowhere," her mother had added from the doorway, voice clipped. "We have better prospects for her here. You, on the other hand." She'd waved a hand vaguely in Marlo's direction. "This is probably the best offer you'll get." "He doesn't want me," Marlo had said, voice coming out smaller than she'd intended. He asked for a wife," her father interrupted. "He'll get one. What he does with her after that is his business." And that had been that. They'd taken Rhett Mercer's money, packed Marlowe's things into a trunk that barely filled halfway, and put her on a wagon heading north before she could fully process what was happening. Her father had handed her off to Jacob Wells with the same energy he used when selling cattle. Celeste hadn't even come out to say goodbye. Now the wagon was rolling to a stop in front of the ranch house, and Marlowe's entire body had gone rigid with something between terror and resignation. The building in front of her was bigger than she'd expected, 2 stories of dark wood and stone, built to withstand weather that would flatten anything weaker. Barns and outbuildings spread out behind it, and in the distance she could see cattle dotting the hillsides. It was impressive in a stark, unforgiving kind of way. The front door opened. Marlowe's breath caught. Rhett Mercer stepped out onto the porch, and her first coherent thought was that the rumors hadn't been exaggerating. The man was built like the landscape itself, tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of presence that made everything around him seem smaller by comparison. He wore work clothes, not the formal suit she'd half expected, and his dark hair was longer than was fashionable, like he couldn't be bothered with things that didn't serve a purpose. His face was hard, not cruel exactly, but carved from something that didn't bend easily. He looked at the wagon, then at Jacob, then at Marlowe, and stopped. The silence stretched out long enough that Marlowe felt her skin start to crawl. She watched his expression shift from neutral to confused, to something colder, something that made her want to climb back into the wagon and demand Jacob turn around. "Where is she?" Rhett's voice was exactly what she'd expected, low and rough, like he didn't waste it on unnecessary words. Jacob cleared his throat. "This is her, Mr. Mercer. Miss Bennett." "No." Flat, absolute. "Where's Celeste Bennett?" Marlowe's face burned. She'd known this was coming, had spent 4 days preparing herself for this exact moment, but knowing didn't make it hurt less. "I'm Marlowe Bennett," she said, forcing her voice to stay level. "Celeste's sister." Rhett stared at her like she'd just announced she was a completely different species. "I didn't pay for Celeste's sister." "No," Marlowe agreed, climbing down from the wagon before her legs could betray her. "You didn't." She hit the ground harder than she'd intended, stumbled slightly, caught herself. Everything about this was already a disaster, and they'd been here less than 2 minutes. "There's been a mistake," Rhett said. But he wasn't talking to her anymore. He was looking at Jacob like this was somehow the driver's fault. "Take her back." Jacob shifted uncomfortably. "Can't do that, Mr. Mercer. I've got other deliveries to make, and I'm already behind schedule. Besides, her father paid me for one-way passage." "Then I'll pay you for the return trip." "With respect, sir, that's between you and the Bennetts. I completed my job." Rhett's jaw tightened. For a moment, Marlowe thought he might actually grab Jacob by the collar and throw him back onto the wagon, passenger and all. Instead, he turned that cold stare back on her. "Did you know about this?" Marlowe lifted her chin. She'd be damned if she'd cower in front of him, even if everything inside her wanted to curl up and disappear. "I found out 2 weeks ago." "And you just went along with it?" The question landed like a slap. Like she'd had a choice. Like she'd woken up one morning and decided to ruin a stranger's plans for her own amusement. "What exactly did you expect me to do?" she asked, and there was more edge in her voice than she'd intended. "Tell my father no? Run away with no money and nowhere to go? I'm here because they sent me here, not because I wanted to deceive anyone." "Your family deceived me." "Yes," Marlowe said simply. "They did." Rhett looked at her for a long moment, and Marlowe couldn't read whatever was happening behind his eyes. Anger, definitely. Frustration. But there was something else there too, something that might have been calculation. "Can you work?" he asked finally. The question caught her off guard. "What?" "Work. Can you do it? Or are you going to stand around looking decorative and useless?" Marlowe's temper flared. "I've worked every day of my life. I can manage a household, keep accounts, handle livestock, repair fences, tend injuries, and do about 50 other things you probably haven't thought of yet. What I can't do is make myself look like my sister or apologize for existing." Something flickered across Rhett's face. Surprise, maybe, or reluctant respect. It was gone too quickly for her to be sure. "Jacob," he said, still watching Marlowe, "you can go." The driver didn't need to be told twice. He had Marlowe's trunk unloaded and was back on the wagon within minutes, clearly relieved to be escaping whatever mess he'd just delivered into. Marlowe stood in the yard and watched him disappear down the road, taking with him the last connection to anything familiar. The wind picked up, colder than before, and she wrapped her arms around herself. When she turned back, Rhett was still standing on the porch, looking at her like she was a problem he needed to solve. "I didn't agree to this," he said. "Neither did I. You're not what I paid for." "I'm aware." He made a frustrated noise. "Your father took my money under false pretenses. That's fraud." "Yes," Marlowe said tiredly. "It is. You're welcome to take it up with him. I'm sure he'll be very apologetic while he spends your money on whatever he spends money on, probably whiskey and new dresses for Celeste." Rhett's expression darkened. "You don't seem bothered by that." "I stopped being bothered by my family's behavior years ago, Mr. Mercer. Being bothered by it doesn't change anything." He studied her for another moment, then turned and walked back into the house without another word. Marlowe stood there, alone in the yard, and tried to figure out what she was supposed to do now. The door opened again. Rhett reappeared, shrugging into a heavy coat. "There's a room upstairs," he said, not quite looking at her. "Second door on the right. You can sleep there tonight. Tomorrow we'll figure out what to do with you." It wasn't welcoming, it wasn't even particularly kind, but it was better than being put back on a wagon immediately, so Marlowe grabbed her trunk and dragged it toward the house. The ranch house interior was exactly what she'd expected, functional to the point of being sparse. Dark wood floors, simple furniture, everything built to last rather than impress. It was clean, at least, which suggested either Rhett managed his own housekeeping or someone came in to do it for him. The stairs creaked under her feet. Marlowe found the room he'd mentioned, small and cold, with a narrow bed and a single window that looked out over the plains. Someone had left blankets folded at the foot of the bed, and there was a wash basin on a small table in the corner. It wasn't much, but it was hers, at least for tonight. Marlowe set down her trunk and sat on the edge of the bed. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her thighs and took a slow breath, then another. She'd survived being unwanted by her own family for 20 years. She could survive being unwanted by a stranger for however long this lasted. Tomorrow, they'd figure something out. Maybe he'd send her back. Maybe he'd find somewhere else to send her. Maybe he'd just put her to work until he could figure out a better solution. It didn't matter. Marlowe had learned a long time ago not to expect happy endings. Spats. That first night, she barely slept. The wind howled outside her window, rattling the glass in its frame, and every creak of the house settling made her wonder if Rhett was about to throw open the door and demand she leave immediately. She lay there in the dark, fully dressed except for her boots, and stared at the ceiling. This was not how marriages were supposed to start. Not that Marlowe had ever had illusions about romance. She'd read enough books to know what people pretended relationships could be. All passion and devotion and souls recognizing each other across crowded rooms. But she'd also lived in reality long enough to know that most marriages were transactions, property exchanges, arrangements made by people who'd never asked the participants what they actually wanted. Still, she'd thought there might at least be civility, basic human courtesy, an agreement entered into by two people who'd at least seen each other before money changed hands. Instead, she got this. She must have dozed off eventually because the next thing she knew, gray dawn light was filtering through the window and someone was banging on her door. "Get up," Rhett's voice came through the wood. "Sun's been up for 20 minutes, and there's work to do." Marlowe scrambled out of bed, disoriented and clumsy, her body protesting the unfamiliar mattress and the cold. She splashed water on her face from the basin, ice cold because of course it was, and tried to make herself presentable. By the time she made it downstairs, Rhett was already outside. She found him near one of the barns, talking to a man who looked like he'd been carved from the same rough timber as everything else on this ranch. Tall, weathered, with a gray beard and eyes that had seen too much to be impressed by much anymore. Both men turned to look at her as she approached. "This is Marcus," Rhett said without preamble. "He runs the day-to-day operations here. Marcus, this is—" He paused, like he'd forgotten her name or couldn't quite bring himself to say it. "Marlowe Bennett." Marcus tipped his hat. "Ma'am." "Marcus will show you what needs doing," Rhett continued, already turning away. "Don't get in the way, don't waste time, and don't expect anyone to hold your hand." He walked off before Marlowe could respond. Marcus watched him go, then looked back at her with something that might have been sympathy. "Don't take it personal," he said. Boss has been in a foul mood since that wagon showed up. I noticed. You really the wrong sister? Marlowe nodded. Marcus let out a low whistle. That's a hell of a situation. That's one way to put it. He studied her for a moment, and Marlowe tried not to fidget under the scrutiny. She'd been judged her entire life, by her parents, by her sister, by everyone in their small town who'd sized her up and found her wanting. She'd gotten good at standing still for it. You know anything about ranching? Marcus asked. Some. I grew up on a farm, smaller operation than this, but I know my way around livestock and basic repairs. Can you ride? Yes. Good. Come on then. Might as well put you to work before the boss figures out what to do with you. Marlowe followed him toward the barns, and despite everything, despite the disaster of her arrival and the humiliation burning in her chest, she felt something almost like relief. Work she could do. Work made sense. Work didn't require her to be beautiful or charming or anything other than competent. Maybe she could survive this after all. Husk. The ranch was bigger than she'd realized. Marcus walked her through the property, pointing out buildings and explaining operations in the clipped, efficient way of someone who didn't see the point in unnecessary words. There were 2 main barns, a stable, a chicken coop, storage sheds, a smokehouse, and several other structures whose purposes Marlowe would have to learn later. We run about 300 head of cattle, Marcus explained as they walked. Mostly Herefords. Good beef cattle, handle the cold better than most. We've got a dozen hands who work the property, plus seasonal help during branding and roundup. Marlowe tried to absorb it all, the scale of the operation, the routines, the hierarchy of who did what. It was more complex than her father's farm, but the fundamentals were the same. Animals needed feeding, buildings needed maintaining, and there was always more work than there were hours in the day. Boss built most of this himself, Marcus continued. Started with nothing about 10 years ago. Bought the land cheap because nobody else wanted it. Too remote, too harsh. But he made it work. There was respect in his voice when he talked about Rhett, the kind of respect earned through action rather than title. What about... Marlowe hesitated. What about a wife? Was he married before? Marcus shook his head. No, ma'am. Been alone out here the whole time. Finally decided he needed help running the household, I suppose. That's when he sent that letter. So Rhett hadn't been looking for love or companionship. He'd been looking for an employee who'd also warm his bed. Marlowe couldn't decide if that made things better or worse. They spent the morning on basic tasks. Marlowe helped feed the horses, cleaned out stalls, hauled water from the well to the various troughs scattered around the property. Her hands were soft from the wagon ride, too many days without work. And by noon she could feel blisters forming. She didn't complain. Around midday, Marcus led her back to the main house. Boss usually eats in the kitchen. There's a woman from town who comes 3 times a week to cook and clean, Mrs. Hadley, but she's not here today. You know how to make food? Yes? Good. Pantry's through there. Boss will expect lunch ready by 1. He left her to it. Marlowe stood in Rhett's kitchen and took stock. It was better supplied than she'd expected. Clearly the work of someone who valued function over frills. Good knives, solid cookware, a proper stove. The pantry held basics: flour, cornmeal, beans, salt pork, preserved vegetables. Not fancy, but enough to work with. She rolled up her sleeves and got to work. By the time Rhett came in from whatever he'd been doing, there was soup on the stove and cornbread cooling on the counter. Nothing elaborate, but hot and filling. The kind of food that made sense for people doing hard physical labor in cold weather. He stopped in the doorway, surprise flickering across his face before he locked it down again. You can cook, he said. I told you I could work. Marlowe ladled soup into a bowl and set it on the table, then cut a thick slice of cornbread to go with it. I wasn't lying. Rhett sat down without comment and started eating. Marlowe fixed her own bowl and took a seat at the opposite end of the table, leaving as much space between them as the small kitchen allowed. They ate in silence. It wasn't comfortable exactly, but it wasn't hostile either. Just empty. Like 2 strangers sharing a space who didn't owe each other conversation. After a few minutes, Rhett said, Marcus says you worked this morning. Yes. He says you didn't complain. Why would I? Rhett looked at her, something unreadable in his expression. Most women in your situation would have. Marlowe set down her spoon carefully. What situation is that exactly? The situation where my family sold me under false pretenses? The situation where I showed up somewhere I'm clearly not wanted? Or the situation where I have no money, no way home, and nowhere else to go? He didn't answer. I'm here, Mr. Mercer, Marlowe continued, keeping her voice level, even though her pulse was hammering. I didn't choose it, but I'm here. Complaining won't change that. Neither will crying or asking for pity. So I'm going to work because that's the only thing I've ever been good at, and maybe it'll buy me enough time to figure out what happens next. Rhett studied her for a long moment. You're not what I expected. No, Marlowe agreed. I'm not what anyone expects. Story of my life. Something that might have been amusement flickered across his face, there and gone so fast she almost missed it. They finished eating in silence. The days developed a rhythm. Marlowe woke before dawn and worked until exhaustion forced her to stop. Marcus gave her tasks, some menial, some requiring actual skill, and she completed them without comment, mucking stalls, repairing fence lines, helping with the horses, managing the henhouse, whatever needed doing. The ranch hands watched her with undisguised curiosity. She heard the whispers, caught the sideways glances, knew they were talking about her. That's the wrong sister. Boss got tricked. Wonder how long she'll last. Marlowe ignored them. She'd been talked about her entire life. At least these strangers had the decency to pretend she couldn't hear them. Rhett remained distant. He gave her instructions through Marcus, ate the meals she prepared in silence, and generally acted like she was a piece of furniture that happened to require feeding. It should have been insulting, and maybe it was, but Marlowe found it almost preferable to active hostility. Indifference she could work with. Indifference didn't demand anything from her except competence. 2 weeks in, a storm rolled across the plains. Marlowe had grown up with bad weather, but Montana storms were different, meaner. The sky turned the color of old bruises, and the wind picked up so fast it felt like the world had suddenly decided to shake itself apart. Get the animals secured, Marcus shouted over the growing wind. Anyone not essential, get inside. Marlowe helped herd the horses into the stable, fighting against wind that threatened to knock her off her feet. The cattle were already moving toward shelter, their instincts better than human planning, but some of the younger calves were panicking. There. One of the hands, a young guy named Tom, pointed toward the far pasture. 3 calves stuck by the fence, Marcus swore. No time. Storm's going to hit in minutes. They'll die out there, Marlowe said. Better than us dying trying to save them. Marlowe looked at the calves, then at the approaching storm, and made a decision that was probably stupid. She ran. Wait! Marcus's shout got swallowed by the wind. Marlowe kept running, head down, arms pumping. The calves were huddled against the fence line, terrified and frozen. She grabbed the first one, heavier than it looked, all awkward, gangly limbs, and half dragged, half carried it toward the barn. The sky opened up. Rain came down in sheets, cold and vicious, turning the ground to mud within seconds. Marlowe couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. She got the first calf into the barn, spun around, and went back for the others. By the time she reached them, she was soaked through and shaking. The second calf fought her, terrified, and she had to grab it around the middle and just hold on while it thrashed. Her boots slipped in the mud. She went down hard, landing on her knee with enough force to make her vision blur. Get up, she got up. The third calf was the smallest, and mercifully, it seemed too scared to fight. Marlowe tucked it against her chest and staggered back toward the barn through wind that felt like it was trying to shove her into the ground. Someone grabbed her arm. Rhett. He appeared out of the storm like he'd materialized from the rain itself, and without a word, he took the calf from her and hauled her the rest of the way to safety. They collapsed inside the barn, water streaming off them, while the storm raged outside. What the hell were you thinking? Rhett demanded. Marlowe was shaking too hard to answer immediately. When she could get words out, she said, They would have died. So could you. But I didn't. Rhett looked at her like she was insane. Maybe she was. Her knee was screaming, her hands were bleeding from where she'd grabbed rough wood, and she couldn't feel her fingers anymore. But the calves were safe. You're an idiot, Rhett said. Probably, Marlowe agreed. He made a frustrated noise and pulled off his coat, which was slightly less soaked than hers. He wrapped it around her shoulders without asking, then turned and stalked off toward the other end of the barn, leaving Marlowe sitting in the hay, confused and shivering and wondering what the hell had just happened. Psychic. After the storm, something shifted. It wasn't obvious. Rhett didn't suddenly become warm or friendly. But the razor edge of hostility that had defined those first 2 weeks seemed to dull slightly. He still didn't talk to her much, but when he did, it was less like he was addressing a mistake and more like he was addressing a person. Progress, maybe, or just exhaustion wearing down his anger. Marlo didn't question it. She kept working. Her hands toughened up, calluses forming over the blisters. Her body adjusted to the physical demands, muscles she didn't know she had complaining and then strengthening. She learned the routines, the quirks of the horses, the personalities of the ranch hands. She learned Rhett, not through conversation, he wasn't much for that, but through observation. The way he checked every fence line himself rather than trusting someone else to do it properly. The way he worked alongside his hands rather than directing from a distance. The way he was first one up in the morning and last one to bed at night. The man had built this ranch through sheer stubborn force of will, and he maintained it the same way. Marlo could respect that, even if she couldn't respect how he treated her. 3 weeks in, Mrs. Hadley showed up for her regular cleaning day and stopped dead when she saw Marlo in the kitchen. "Oh," she said, eyes going wide, "you're the new wife." Marlo set down the pot she'd been scrubbing. "I'm Marlo Bennett." Mrs. Hadley was a round woman in her 50s with the kind of face that looked like it smiled often. She studied Marlo with open curiosity. "You're not who he was expecting." "No." Lord, what a mess. But she said it with sympathy rather than judgment. "Well, you're here now. Might as well make the best of it. You know how to manage a household this size?" "I'm learning." "Good. Come on then. I'll show you where things are and how the boss likes them done." Mrs. Hadley turned out to be a font of information, and unlike Marcus's clipped explanations, she provided context and history with every detail. Rhett liked his coffee strong enough to strip paint. He was particular about his shirts being pressed a certain way. He had a bad shoulder from a horse accident 2 years ago that acted up in cold weather. "He's not mean," Mrs. Hadley said at one point, as if reading Marlo's mind. "Just difficult. Been on his own too long, I think. Forgot how to be around people." "He seems fine with Marcus in the hands." "That's different. That's work. He knows how to handle work." She paused, measuring Marlo with a look. "Personal things, though, that's harder for him." Marlo absorbed that without comment. That evening, she found Rhett in the study going over ledgers. She knocked on the doorframe, and he looked up with visible surprise. "I wanted to talk to you," Marlo said. Rhett set down his pen. "About what?" "About what I'm doing here." She stepped into the room, hands clasped in front of her to stop them from shaking. "I've been here 3 weeks. I've worked. I've kept out of your way. And I haven't asked for anything. But we can't just keep pretending this situation doesn't exist. What do you want me to say?" "I want to know what happens next. Are you sending me back? Keeping me here? Making some other arrangement? Because I can't just exist in limbo indefinitely." Rhett leaned back in his chair. "You want to go back?" "No," Marlo said honestly. "But I also don't want to stay somewhere I'm not wanted." "You work hard." It wasn't an answer to her question, but it was something. "I told you I could." "You did." He studied her, and for the first time it didn't feel like he was looking at a problem. "I don't know what happens next, Marlo. I'm still figuring that out." It was the first time he'd used her name. Something in her chest loosened slightly. "Okay," she said. "That's fair." She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Marlo." She looked back. "Thank you," Rhett said, "for the work, and for staying." It wasn't much, but for a man who seemed to measure his words like currency, it felt like more than nothing. Marlo nodded and left him to his ledgers. That night, she lay in her small room and stared at the ceiling, and for the first time since arriving at Raven Spur Ranch, she allowed herself to think that maybe, this wasn't the worst thing that could have happened to her. She'd been unwanted her entire life. At least here, she was useful. And maybe eventually, useful could be enough. Winter set in hard after that. The kind of cold that made breath visible even indoors, that turned water to ice in the basins overnight, that crept through walls and floors and reminded everyone that Montana didn't give a damn about human comfort. Marlo woke every morning to frost patterns on her window and the sound of wind that never seemed to stop. She learned to dress in layers, to wrap her hands before going outside, to move quickly between buildings because standing still meant freezing. The work didn't stop for weather. Animals still needed feeding, ice still needed breaking on the water troughs, and the endless maintenance of keeping a ranch functional in brutal conditions still needed doing. Rhett pushed harder during winter. Marlowe noticed it in the way he moved, faster, more focused, like he was trying to outwork the season itself. He checked every building for weakness, reinforced anything that looked questionable, and drove the hands to prepare for worse weather that was inevitably coming. "He gets like this every year," Marcus told her one morning while they were hauling hay to the cattle. "Saw too many ranches fail his first few winters here. Lost neighbors, lost friends. Now he overprepares for everything." "Better than underpreparing," Marlowe said, her breath forming clouds in the air. True enough. She'd been at Raven's Spur for 6 weeks now, and the work had changed her. Her hands were rough, her shoulders stronger, her body adjusted to the constant physical demands. She could lift things she couldn't have managed 2 months ago, could work through exhaustion that would have flattened her old self. Mrs. Hadley had noticed. "You're filling out," she'd said a few days earlier, not unkindly. "Getting some meat on those bones. Hard work and regular meals will do that." Marlowe had never been fragile, just average, unremarkable. But now she felt solid in a way she hadn't before, like her body was finally catching up to the life it was living. The ranch hands had stopped whispering about her mostly. She'd proven herself enough times that the novelty of the wrong sister had worn off. Now they just treated her like part of the operation. Tom sometimes asked her opinion on the horses. Marcus trusted her with tasks that required judgment rather than just muscle. Even the older hands who'd been skeptical at first had started nodding when she walked by. Progress. Measured in small acknowledgments. Rhett remained complicated. Some days he barely looked at her, so focused on whatever problem needed solving that she might as well have been invisible. Other days she'd catch him watching her work with an expression she couldn't read, something between assessment and confusion, like he was trying to figure out a puzzle that kept changing its shape. They ate dinner together most nights now. Not by explicit agreement, just by routine settling into place. Marlowe cooked, Rhett ate, and they sat at opposite ends of the kitchen table in a silence that was slowly becoming less hostile and more just, quiet. One evening, about 7 weeks in, Rhett broke the pattern. "Where'd you learn to handle horses?" he asked. Marlowe looked up from her stew, surprised. They'd gone 3 days without him speaking more than 10 words to her. "My father's farm. We had 6 horses for field work and transportation. I took care of them." "You're better with them than most of my hands." It was probably the closest thing to a compliment she'd get from him. "I like horses. They're honest. They don't pretend to feel things they don't feel." Something flickered across Rhett's face. "Unlike people." "Unlike some people," Marlowe corrected. He went back to eating, but she could feel him thinking. After a moment, he said, "We've got a mare that's been giving everyone trouble. Won't let anyone near her since we brought her in from winter pasture. Marcus wants to sell her, but she's good stock." "What do you want to do?" "I want her working, not wasting space and feed." Marlowe set down her spoon. "I can look at her tomorrow if you want." Rhett studied her. "She's mean. Kicked Tom hard enough to crack a rib last week." "Then Tom probably deserved it. Horses don't kick for no reason." "You sound sure about that." "I am sure about that." The corner of Rhett's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close enough to surprise her. "All right. Tomorrow, then." The next morning, Marlowe found the mare in a stall at the far end of the stable. Beautiful animal, dark bay coat, good conformation, intelligent eyes that tracked Marlowe's approach with visible distrust. Tom was leaning against the opposite wall, keeping a safe distance. "That's her. Demon horse." "What's her name?" "We've been calling her Hell's Daughter, mostly." Marlowe shot him a look. "Her actual name?" "Don't think she has one. Boss bought her off a trader passing through about 3 months back. She was fine at first, then something changed." Marlowe approached the stall slowly, keeping her movements smooth and predictable. The mare's ears flattened, but she didn't immediately try to kick through the door. "Hey there," Marlowe said quietly. "Bad morning?" The mare snorted. "Yeah, me too. Let's see what's going on with you." She studied the horse from a distance first. Posture, weight distribution, how she was standing. There, The mare was favoring her left front leg slightly. Weight shifted just enough to be noticeable if you were looking for it. Tom, when did you last check her hooves? Last week, maybe? She wouldn't let me near them. So you just gave up? Tom had the decency to look embarrassed. After she kicked me, yeah. Marlowe unlocked the stall door and slipped inside before Tom could protest. The mare immediately backed into the corner, head high, ready to fight. Easy, Marlowe murmured. Nobody's going to hurt you. I just want to look. She didn't approach directly. Instead, she stood to the side, angled away, making herself smaller and less threatening. She kept talking, nonsense mostly, just a steady stream of words that mattered less than the tone. The mare watched her with one eye, body tense. Marlowe waited. It took 20 minutes of standing there, talking to a horse that probably thought she was insane, before the mare's ears flicked forward slightly, curiosity winning over fear. Marlowe moved closer. One step. Waited. Another step. She got close enough to touch the mare's shoulder, felt the muscle tension beneath her palm. She worked her way down the legs slowly, talking the whole time until she reached the hoof. "Can I see?" she asked, as if the horse might answer. She lifted the hoof, and the mare shifted but didn't kick. There it was, a stone wedged in the frog, infected tissue around it, painful every time the horse put weight on it, which explained the attitude perfectly. "Tom, get me the hoof pick and some warm water," Marlowe called, not taking her eyes off the mare. "You want me to come in there?" "No, just pass them through the door." It took another 30 minutes to work the stone out and clean the infected area. The mare stood for it, trembling slightly, but trusting enough not to fight. When Marlowe finally stepped back, the horse was standing differently, weight distributed evenly, head lower, the defensive tension gone from her body. "You're not a demon," Marlowe said, stroking the mare's neck. "You're just hurt." And nobody listened. She left the stall and found Tom staring at her like she'd performed magic. "How did you do that?" "I paid attention," Marlowe said simply. "She needs the hoof cleaned twice a day until the infection clears. And she needs a proper name, not something insulting." "What should we call her?" Marlowe thought about it. "Sable. Her name's Sable." Word spread fast. By the time Marlowe made it back to the house for lunch, half the ranch seemed to know that the new wife had tamed the demon horse. She tried to ignore the looks, the whispered conversations that stopped when she walked past. She found Rhett in the kitchen, already eating the sandwich she'd left for him that morning. "Heard you fixed the mare," he said without preamble. "Stone in her hoof. Infected. She wasn't mean, just hurt." Rhett nodded slowly. "Marcus says you handled her better than anyone else has tried." I listened to what she was telling me. Most people don't bother listening to horses. Most people don't bother listening to anything that can't benefit them directly, Marlowe said, sharper than she'd intended. Rhett's eyes met hers, and for a moment the kitchen felt very small. Then he said, "No, they don't." Something unspoken passed between them. An acknowledgement, maybe. A recognition that they'd both spent time being unheard, unvalued, treated as less than they were. Rhett cleared his throat and stood. "I need to check the north fence line. Marcus said there's damage from the last storm." He left before Marlowe could respond. She stood in the empty kitchen and tried to figure out what had just happened. If anything had happened at all, or if she was reading meaning into silence because she was desperate for something to hold on to. The days grew shorter and colder. December arrived with snow that fell so thick Marlowe could barely see the barns from the house. The work became harder, everything taking twice as long when you had to fight through drifts and ice. But the ranch functioned. The animals stayed fed and sheltered, the buildings held against the weather, and the hands worked together with the efficiency of people who knew what failure looked like and refused to accept it. Marlowe fell into her cot every night exhausted enough to sleep immediately, which was mercy. Less time to think, less time to miss things she'd never actually had. 2 days before Christmas, Mrs. Hadley showed up with a basket of supplies. "I'm cooking Christmas dinner here," she announced, bustling into the kitchen. "Boss needs a proper meal, and you need feeding up. You're still too thin." "I'm fine," Marlowe protested. "You're working yourself to bones, is what you're doing. Now sit down and have some tea while I sort through this disaster of a pantry." Marlowe sat. She'd learned not to argue with Mrs. Hadley about certain things. "You planning anything for Christmas?" Mrs. Hadley asked, rearranging jars with visible disapproval at their organization. Working, probably, same as every day. That's no way to spend Christmas. It's just another day. Mrs. Hadley turned and looked at her with something like pity. Lord, child, who hurt you so bad you stopped believing in nice things? The question hit harder than it should have. Marlowe kept her face neutral. Nobody hurt me. I just learned to be realistic about expectations. Realistic is one thing, giving up is another. I haven't given up. Haven't you? You work like a dog, never ask for anything, act like you don't deserve basic kindness. That's not being realistic, honey. That's being beaten down. Marlowe's throat felt tight. I'm doing what I need to do to survive here. Surviving isn't living. It's more than I had before. Mrs. Hadley's expression softened. She sat down across from Marlowe and took her hand, which was so unexpected that Marlowe almost pulled away. You deserve more than just surviving. You know that, right? Marlowe didn't answer because she didn't know how to. Deserving felt like a concept for other people. People who'd been wanted and valued and taught that they mattered. Mrs. Hadley squeezed her hand. I'm making you a proper Christmas dinner whether you think you deserve it or not. And you're going to sit at that table with the boss and eat it and pretend to have a pleasant time. Understood? Despite everything, Marlowe almost smiled. Yes, ma'am. Christmas morning dawned clear and brutally cold. Marlowe did her usual chores, fed the animals, broke ice on the water troughs, and tried not to think about previous Christmases. The ones where Celeste got elaborate gifts and attention while Marlowe got practical things like new work gloves or a sturdy apron. She'd stopped expecting anything else years ago. But when she came back inside, frozen and tired, she found a package on the kitchen table with her name on it. She stared at it like it might be a trap. It's not going to bite you, Rhett's voice came from the doorway. He was leaning against the frame, watching her with an expression she couldn't read. What is it? Open it and find out. Marlowe approached the package slowly. Inside was a pair of leather work gloves, good quality, lined with fur, the kind that actually kept hands warm in Montana winter, and beneath them, a wool scarf in deep blue. I noticed your old gloves were falling apart, Rhett said, and you're always cold. Marlowe couldn't speak. She ran her fingers over the soft wool of the scarf, and something inside her chest cracked open. I didn't get you anything, she managed finally. Didn't expect you to. Why would you? Because you work hard, Rhett said simply, and you needed them. That's reason enough. It shouldn't have mattered this much. They were practical gifts, tools for work, nothing romantic or personal. But Marlowe couldn't remember the last time someone had noticed what she needed and just given it to her without strings attached. Thank you, she said quietly. Rhett nodded and disappeared back outside, leaving her alone with her gifts and the uncomfortable feeling that something between them was shifting in ways she didn't know how to navigate. Mrs. Hadley's Christmas dinner was excessive. Roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, gravy, vegetables, bread, and a pie that filled the kitchen with the smell of cinnamon and apples. She'd insisted that Marcus and a few of the closer hands join them, so the kitchen was crowded and noisy in a way the house usually wasn't. Marlowe sat between Mrs. Hadley and Tom, wearing her new scarf even though they were inside, and tried to remember how to be around people celebrating something. Boss, this chicken is outstanding, Marcus said, raising his glass. To Mrs. Hadley's cooking. To Mrs. Hadley, everyone echoed. The older woman beamed. To surviving another year in this frozen hellscape. That got laughs. Marlowe found herself relaxing slightly. The food was good, the company was easy, and nobody was looking at her like she was a problem to be solved. For a few hours, she could almost pretend this was normal, that she belonged here. After dinner, the hands drifted back to the bunkhouse, and Mrs. Hadley started cleaning up, despite Marlowe's protests that she'd handle it. You go sit by the fire, Mrs. Hadley ordered. You've earned a few minutes of rest. Marlowe retreated to the front room, where Rhett had lit a fire in the stone fireplace. She sat on the worn sofa and watched the flames, feeling the warmth seep into her bones. Rhett came in a few minutes later carrying 2 glasses. He handed her one without comment and sat in the chair across from her. Whiskey, he said. It's Christmas. Marlowe took a sip and tried not to cough. It burned going down, but in a good way, spreading warmth through her chest. They sat in silence, watching the fire. This is different, Rhett said eventually. What is? Having someone here. For Christmas. He paused. Having you here, Marlo didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. I've been alone out here for 10 years, Rhett continued, voice low. Built this place by myself, kept it running by myself, got used to the quiet, the solitude, convinced myself I preferred it that way. Did you? I thought I did. He took a drink. Then you showed up and everything got complicated. I didn't mean to complicate anything. I know, that's not... He stopped, frustrated with his own words. You work hard. You don't complain. You handle things I didn't think you'd be able to handle, and you're not her. Marlo's stomach clenched. Celeste. Yeah. Rhett stared into his glass. I built this picture in my head based on a letter and a photograph. Convinced myself I knew what I wanted, what would work. Then you arrived instead, and I was angry because it wasn't what I'd planned. I know. I was there for that part. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. You were. And you didn't fall apart. Didn't beg or cry or demand I make it right. You just started working, like you'd been here all along. What else was I supposed to do? Most people would have done something different, something louder. He looked at her directly. I'm saying I was wrong. About you. About this situation. Marlo's heart was doing complicated things in her chest. Wrong how? I thought you were a mistake, a problem I'd have to solve, but you're not. He stopped again, searching for words that clearly didn't come easily. You fit here. Better than I thought possible. Better than she probably would have. It was the most he'd said to her at once since she'd arrived. Marlo sat very still, afraid that moving might break whatever spell had made him actually talk to her like a person. I don't know what I am to you, Rhett, she said carefully. An employee? A wife in name only? Something else? Because we can't keep existing in this limbo where neither of us knows what the other expects. He was quiet for a long moment. The fire crackled, and outside the wind howled against the windows. I don't know either, he admitted finally, but I'm trying to figure it out. It wasn't a declaration, wasn't a promise, but it was honest, and Marlo found she valued honesty more than pretty words anyway. Okay, she said. We'll figure it out together then. Rhett nodded, and something that might have been relief crossed his face. They finished their whiskey in silence, but it felt different now. Less empty. More like two people actually sitting together rather than just occupying the same space. Winter deepened after Christmas. January came in mean, with temperatures that dropped so low the air itself felt dangerous. But inside the ranch house, something had thawed. Rhett started talking to her more. Not constant conversation, he wasn't built for that, but actual exchanges that went beyond necessity. He asked her opinion on things, listened when she gave it, sometimes even took her suggestions. One evening, she found him staring at the ranch accounts with visible frustration. Problem? She asked. Numbers don't add up. I'm short somewhere, but I can't figure out where. Marlo moved closer and looked over his shoulder. She'd kept her father's books for years. He'd been too lazy to do it himself, and her mother couldn't be bothered. She knew how to track money. May I? Rhett slid the ledger toward her. It took her 15 minutes to find the error, a column miscalculated 3 months back that had been carrying forward wrong ever since. She showed him the mistake, worked through the correction, and had the books balanced before he'd finished his coffee. Rhett stared at the corrected numbers. How did you do that so fast? Practice. I ran my father's accounts for years. Why didn't you tell me you could do this? You didn't ask. He looked at her for a long moment. What else can you do that I don't know about? Guess you'll have to keep asking to find out. That almost smile appeared again. I guess I will. After that, he handed over the ranch books entirely. Marlo took them over with the same efficiency she'd brought to everything else, organizing the chaos into systems that actually made sense. She found ways to cut costs without cutting quality, identified suppliers who were overcharging, and caught errors before they became problems. You're better at this than I am, Rhett said one evening, watching her work. You're better at building things. I'm better at organizing them. That's not a weakness. It is when you're trying to do everything yourself. Then it's good you're not doing everything yourself anymore. He didn't argue. February brought more snow and a different kind of crisis. 3 of the hands came down with flu, bad enough that they couldn't work. Marcus was stretched thin, trying to cover everything with a reduced crew, and Rhett was working 18-hour days trying to keep operations running. Marlo stepped up. She took over tasks the sick men usually handled, worked alongside Marcus and the remaining hands, and somehow kept the household running at the same time. She was moving on 4 hours of sleep and pure stubbornness, but the ranch didn't fall apart. One night, she stumbled into the kitchen past midnight and found Rhett sitting at the table, head in his hands. "You should be sleeping," she said. "So should you. Somebody has to make sure you don't work yourself to death." He looked up, and she could see the exhaustion in his face. "I'm supposed to be the one holding this place together. Why does it have to be just you?" "Because it's mine. My responsibility. My burden." Marlo sat down across from him. "That's stupid." He blinked, surprised. "It's stupid," she repeated. "You have people here who want to help, who are helping, but you keep acting like accepting help means you've failed somehow. That's not strength, Rhett. That's just stubbornness. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. You built this place alone, so you think you have to maintain it alone. But that's not how this works. That's not how anything sustainable works. What do you know about sustainable?" The words came out harsher than he probably intended. Marlo didn't flinch. "I know that my father tried to do everything himself because he didn't trust anyone else. And I know that his farm is failing because he's too proud to accept help and too stubborn to change. I watched it happen for 20 years, so yeah. I know a little about what happens when pride gets mistaken for strength." Rhett stared at her. Then slowly his shoulders dropped. "You're right." "I know." "How are you right so often?" "Practice," Marlo said. "And honestly, the bar is pretty low." That surprised a laugh out of him, an actual laugh, rough and unexpected. It transformed his face, made him look younger and less burdened. Marlo found herself smiling back. They sat there in the quiet kitchen, exhausted and honest, and something settled between them, something that felt almost like partnership. The hands recovered slowly, one by one, and the ranch settled back into its rhythm. But something had shifted in those weeks of crisis. The way Rhett looked at Marlo changed. Not dramatically, nothing about him was ever dramatic, but she caught him watching her sometimes with an expression that wasn't calculation or assessment. It was something closer to curiosity, maybe respect. March arrived with the kind of weather that couldn't decide what it wanted to be. Snow one day, rain the next, mud everywhere. The cattle grew restless, and the horses picked up on the changing season's energy. Everything felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for winter to finally break. Marlo was in the stable one afternoon, working with Sable. The mare had recovered completely from her hoof infection and turned out to be one of the smartest horses on the ranch. She learned fast, responded well, and had a personality that Marlo found herself genuinely fond of. "You're good with her," Rhett's voice came from behind her. Marlo didn't startle. She'd gotten used to his habit of appearing without warning. "She's easy to work with once you earn her trust. Not everyone can do that. Most people don't try hard enough." Marlo ran her hand down Sable's neck. "They expect trust to come automatically, like it's owed to them. But trust is earned, especially from something that's been hurt." She felt Rhett's attention sharpen, like he'd heard something beyond her words. "You talking about the horse?" he said. "Or something else?" Marlo glanced back at him. "Does it matter?" "Yeah," Rhett said quietly. "I think it does." They looked at each other across the stable, and Marlo felt that pull again. The one that had been growing stronger since Christmas, since that night in the kitchen when he'd actually laughed. It scared her, that pull. Wanting things had never worked out well for her before. "I should finish up here," she said, turning back to Sable. "Marlo." She stopped but didn't turn around. "I'm trying," Rhett said, "to be better at this, at talking, at not being—" He trailed off, frustrated. "At not being what?" "Alone," he finished. "I'm trying not to be alone anymore, even though I don't know how to be any other way." Marlo's throat felt tight. She knew exactly what he meant because she'd been alone in rooms full of people her entire life. Being physically present didn't mean you weren't isolated. "I don't know how to not be alone either," she admitted. "But I guess we can figure it out together." She heard him move closer, felt him stop just behind her. Close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, but not touching. "Not yet." "I'd like that," he said. Then he left, and Marlo stood there with her hand on Sable's warm neck, trying to steady her breathing and figure out what the hell was happening between them. The answer came faster than she expected. 2 days later, Marlo was working in the kitchen when she heard raised voices outside. She looked through the window and saw an unfamiliar wagon pulled up in front of the house. A man was climbing down, well-dressed, soft-looking, the kind who'd never done real physical labor in his life. Rhett was standing on the porch, and even from a distance, Marlo could see the tension in his shoulders. She dried her hands and went outside. Paid good money for specific merchandise, the stranger was saying, voice carrying despite the wind. And you accepted that payment. That constitutes a binding contract. I paid for a wife, Rhett said, voice flat and dangerous. I got one. The stranger laughed, and it was an ugly sound. You got a substitute, a fraud. That's grounds for nullification and reimbursement. Marlo's stomach dropped. This was her father. Had to be. He'd sent someone to negotiate getting his daughter back, probably because Rhett had threatened legal action. She stepped off the porch. Both men turned to look at her. Who are you? She asked the stranger. Robert Thornton, attorney. I represent Garrett Bennett regarding a contractual dispute with Mr. Mercer concerning me, Marlo interrupted, the merchandise in question. Thornton had the grace to look uncomfortable. Miss Bennett, I'm simply here to facilitate a fair resolution to this unfortunate misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding. My father committed fraud. He took money for my sister and sent me instead. Marlo kept her voice level, even though she wanted to scream. What kind of resolution are you proposing? Mr. Bennett is prepared to return the full payment to Mr. Mercer, plus reasonable compensation for inconvenience. In return, you would return home, and the arrangement would be dissolved. No, Rhett said. Everyone looked at him. No? Thornton repeated. Mr. Mercer, surely you want restitution for... I don't want the money back, Rhett said. He was looking at Marlo now, not the attorney. And she's not going anywhere. Marlo's heart was doing something complicated. Rhett, you want to leave? He asked her directly. Did she? 3 months ago, the answer would have been yes without hesitation. But now she had work that mattered, a place that felt more like home than her father's house ever had, and a man who was trying, however awkwardly, to see her as something other than a burden. No, she said. I don't want to leave. Thornton made an exasperated noise. This is highly irregular. Mr. Bennett specifically requested I don't care what Mr. Bennett requested, Marlo said, something hot and fierce rising in her chest. He sold me. He doesn't get to demand me back when it's convenient for him. You're still legally his daughter until what? Until another man owns me instead? Marlo laughed, and it came out bitter. I'm 20 years old. I can make my own decisions about where I live and who I stay with. If my father wants his money back, he can come get it himself. But he's not getting me. Thornton looked between them, clearly calculating whether this trip was worth continuing. After a moment, he pulled out a card and handed it to Rhett. If you reconsider, Mr. Mercer, my office details are there. This matter could become quite complicated legally. It won't, Rhett said, because there's nothing to reconsider. They watched Thornton climb back onto his wagon and drive away. Marlo's hands were shaking, adrenaline flooding through her now that the confrontation was over. You didn't have to do that, she said quietly. Yes, I did. He's right, you know. This could get complicated. My father might actually try to take legal action. Rhett turned to face her fully. Let him try. I'm not giving you back like your defective equipment. You work harder than anyone I've ever met. You've kept this ranch running through the worst winter I can remember. He stopped, jaw working like the words were stuck. I'm what? You're mine, he said roughly. Not in the way your father thinks of ownership, but you're here. You're part of this place, He gestured vaguely between them. This, whatever this is. Marlo felt tears prickling behind her eyes and absolutely refused to let them fall. You really mean that? I don't say things I don't mean. She believed him. Rhett was many things, stubborn, difficult, emotionally constipated, but he wasn't a liar. Okay, she said. Okay? Okay, I'll stay. I want to stay. She took a breath. But I need to know what I'm staying for, Rhett. Are we actually married? Are we partners? Are we just two people sharing a house and pretending we don't feel anything? He moved closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to keep looking at him. I don't know what we are yet, but I know I don't want you to leave. And I know that when that lawyer said your father wanted you back, I wanted to throw him off my property for even suggesting it. That's a start, Marlowe said, voice barely above a whisper. Yeah. Rhett lifted his hand, hesitated, then touched her face, just his fingertips against her cheek, rough and careful at the same time. It is. Neither of them moved. The moment stretched out, fragile and weighted with everything they weren't saying. Then Marcus shouted something from the barn, and the spell broke. Rhett dropped his hand and stepped back. I should... Yeah, Marlowe said. Go. He left, and she stood in the yard alone, touching the spot on her face where his fingers had been. Things got easier after that, and harder in different ways. Easier because the pretense was gone. They weren't pretending to be strangers anymore, weren't maintaining the careful distance they'd started with. They talked more, worked together better, fell into a rhythm that felt almost natural. Harder, because Marlowe couldn't ignore what she was feeling anymore. Couldn't pretend that the way her stomach flipped when Rhett smiled at her was nothing. Couldn't dismiss the fact that she looked for him first thing every morning and missed him when he was working the far pastures. She was falling for him. Had been falling for him probably since the day he'd wrapped his coat around her in that storm. Maybe earlier. It was terrifying. April brought rain and mud and the first real signs of spring. The cattle started calving, which meant long nights and emergency situations, and Marlowe learning more about bovine reproduction than she'd ever wanted to know. She was in the barn at 2 a.m, helping a first-time mother through a difficult birth, when Rhett appeared with coffee and blankets. Thought you might need these, he said. You're a miracle, Marlowe said, accepting the coffee gratefully. The barn was cold despite the animal body heat, and she'd been shivering for the past hour. Rhett draped one of the blankets around her shoulders. How's she doing? Struggling, the calf's positioned wrong, and she's getting tired. Need help? Can you hold her steady while I try to reposition? They worked together in the dim lantern light, and Marlowe was struck by how well they moved together now. How she could anticipate what he'd do, how he seemed to know what she needed before she asked. It took another hour, but they got the calf repositioned and delivered. The mother was exhausted but alive, and the calf was wobbly but breathing. Good work, Rhett said, and there was warmth in his voice that hadn't been there months ago. Marlowe looked at him, really looked at him. He was covered in mud and worse, hair falling in his face, exhaustion in every line of his body. And she'd never seen anyone more attractive in her life. Rhett, she started, not sure what she was going to say. He was looking at her the same way. Like he was seeing something that mattered. Like she was something that mattered. Marlowe, he said, and there was a question in it. She didn't let herself think, just moved forward and kissed him. It was awkward at first. Neither of them had any practice at this with each other, and they were both filthy and exhausted. But then Rhett's hand came up to cup the back of her head, and his mouth moved against hers with something like desperation, and everything else fell away. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Marlowe said, "Was that okay?" Rhett laughed, actually laughed, breathless and surprised. "Yeah, that was more than okay. Good. Because I've wanted to do that for weeks, and I thought I was going to lose my mind if I had to wait any longer." Weeks? At least? Maybe longer. I lost track. He kissed her again, slower this time, thorough and deliberate. When he pulled back, his eyes were dark and warm and focused entirely on her. "We should probably get cleaned up." "Probably," Marlowe agreed, not moving, "and get some sleep." "That would be smart." Neither of them moved. "Or," Rhett said slowly, "we could go inside, get cleaned up, and then not sleep." Heat flooded through Marlowe. "That sounds better." They left the barn hand in hand, and Marlowe felt something in her chest expand. Hope, maybe. Or just happiness, pure and uncomplicated, the kind she'd stopped believing she deserved. Morning came too soon and found them tangled together in Rhett's bed, bigger and warmer than her small room upstairs. Marlowe woke slowly, disoriented by the unfamiliar space and the solid warmth pressed against her back. Rhett's arm was around her waist, holding her close even in sleep. She lay there and tried to process what had happened. They'd crossed a line last night, turned whatever this was into something real and tangible. There was no going back now. Did she want to go back? No. Absolutely not. Rhett stirred behind her, his hand tightening on her waist. You awake? His voice was rough with sleep. Yeah. Regretting last night? Marlowe rolled over to face him. His hair was a mess and there were pillow creases on his face, and she thought he looked perfect. Not even a little bit. Relief crossed his face. Good. Me neither. We're really doing this then? Doing what? Being married. Actually married, not just legally. Rhett traced his thumb along her jaw. If you want to. I want to, Marlowe said. But I need you to be sure. Because I can't. Her voice caught. I can't be someone's second choice again. I can't be the person you settle for because you couldn't have who you actually wanted. You're not, Rhett said firmly. Marlowe, look at me. She met his eyes. I was an idiot, he said. I built up this fantasy in my head about someone I'd never met based on a letter and a photograph. And when you showed up instead, I was angry because reality didn't match my fantasy. But you know what? My fantasy was shit. It was based on nothing real. You are real. You're here, you're strong, you're stubborn as hell, and you're exactly what I needed even though I was too stupid to see it at first. That's the longest speech I've ever heard you make, Marlowe said, voice thick with emotion she was trying to control. Don't get used to it. But he was smiling. I mean it, though. You're not second choice. You're the only choice, the right choice. Marlowe kissed him, pouring everything she couldn't say into it. When they broke apart, she said, Okay, I believe you. Good. They stayed in bed longer than they should have, talking quietly and touching each other like they were still figuring out that they were allowed to. Eventually, reality intruded in the form of Marcus's voice calling from outside. Boss, we've got a situation with the fence line, Rhett groaned. Timing is not his strong suit. Marlowe laughed and pushed him toward the door. Go, I'll handle breakfast and catch up with you later. He kissed her once more, quick and hard, then got dressed and headed outside. Marlowe lay there for another minute, letting herself feel happy before getting up to face the day. The next few weeks were the best of Marlowe's life, and it felt dangerous to admit that even to herself. She'd learned not to trust good things, not to believe they could last. But this felt different. Rhett didn't suddenly become warm and affectionate. That wasn't who he was. But he touched her more, small gestures that said he was thinking about her. A hand on her back when he passed her in the kitchen, sitting close enough that their legs touched during dinner, pulling her against him at night like he needed to know she was there. They worked together during the day and fell into each other at night, learning what the other liked, what made them laugh, what made them gasp. The ranch hands noticed, of course, but the comments had shifted from mockery to something closer to approval. Marcus had actually smiled when he'd caught them kissing in the stable one afternoon, which was as close to a blessing as they were likely to get. Mrs. Hadley was less subtle. About time, she'd announced when she'd seen Rhett's hand resting on Marlowe's shoulder during lunch. I was starting to think you two were going to dance around each other forever. We weren't dancing, Rhett said. You were absolutely dancing, and badly. She'd looked at Marlowe with satisfaction. But you figured it out eventually. Good. May arrived with wildflowers and longer days and the kind of weather that made Marlowe understand why people endured Montana winters. The landscape transformed, going from harsh and brown to green and alive, dotted with color that seemed impossible after months of white and gray. She was working in this garden one morning, trying to coax vegetables out of the stubborn soil, when she heard a wagon approaching. Her first thought was that Thornton had returned with more demands from her father, but when she stood and looked, she felt her stomach drop for entirely different reasons. Because the woman climbing down from that wagon was beautiful. Golden-haired, perfectly dressed, moving with the kind of confidence that came from never having been told no. Celeste had come to Ravenspur Ranch. Marlowe's hands went numb. She stood there in the garden, dirt under her fingernails and sweat on her forehead, and watched her sister approach the house like she owned it. Rhett came out onto the porch, drawn by the sound of the wagon. He looked at Celeste, then past her to where Marlowe stood frozen in the garden. Their eyes met across the distance. Marlowe saw the moment Rhett recognized who this had to be, saw his expression close down, going carefully neutral. Celeste smiled, bright and charming and calculated. Mr. Mercer, I presume? I'm Celeste Bennett. I believe you were expecting me. She said it like a joke. Like the past 4 months hadn't happened. Like Marlowe's entire life here was just a funny misunderstanding that could be corrected with her arrival. Rhett didn't smile back. I wasn't expecting anyone. Well, I'm here now. Celeste's eyes swept over the ranch, and Marlowe could see her cataloging, assessing, judging. Better late than never, right? 4 months late, Rhett said flatly. I know, and I apologize. There were complications at home, but I'm here now to fulfill our arrangement. She finally looked toward the garden and saw Marlowe. Her smile didn't falter. Hello, sister. I see you've been keeping things warm for me. Marlowe forced herself to move, to walk toward the house, even though every instinct screamed at her to run. She stopped at the base of the porch steps, close enough to see Celeste's perfect skin and styled hair and expensive dress. Everything Marlowe wasn't and never would be. What are you doing here? Marlowe asked. Coming to claim what's mine, Celeste said simply. Father made a mistake sending you instead of me. I'm here to correct it. 4 months later. Better late than never, Celeste repeated. She looked at Rhett with the full force of her attention, the kind that had made men stupid for as long as Marlowe could remember. Mr. Mercer, I know this is awkward, but surely you can see that this is the better arrangement. You paid for me after all, not my sister. I paid for a wife, Rhett said, voice cold. I have one. Something flickered in Celeste's expression. Surprise, maybe, or calculation adjusting to unexpected resistance. Of course you do, she said smoothly. But wouldn't you prefer the wife you actually chose, the one you sent for? I can give you things Marlowe never could. Marlowe's chest felt tight. This was it. The moment she'd been dreading since Celeste's existence had first been mentioned. Her beautiful, charming, perfect sister showing up to reclaim the life that should have been hers. And Marlowe had no defense against it. How could she compete with someone who looked like Celeste? Who moved through the world with that kind of confidence? Like what? Rhett asked, and there was something sharp in his tone. Celeste laughed. Like grace, sophistication, the kind of polish that comes from proper breeding. I can manage a household, entertain guests, represent you well in society. All the things a man of your position needs. My position, Rhett repeated. You're wealthy, Mr. Mercer. You've built something impressive here. Don't you want a wife who matches that achievement? Someone who can stand beside you at social functions without embarrassing you? Stop, Marlowe said quietly. Celeste ignored her. I'm not trying to be cruel, Marlowe, but we both know Father sent you because he didn't think Mr. Mercer would notice the difference. But he's noticed now, haven't you? And you deserve better than a substitute. I said stop. Marlowe's voice was louder this time. I'm just being honest. You're being cruel. Marlowe climbed the steps until she was level with her sister, close enough to see the calculation in those perfect blue eyes. You show up 4 months late, after I've worked myself half to death to help keep this ranch running, after I've earned my place here, and you think you can just waltz in and take it because you're prettier? It's not about being prettier. Yes, it is. It's always been about that with you. You're beautiful, so you think everything should be handed to you. You think you deserve things just for existing. But you know what? Beauty doesn't feed cattle or fix fences or survive Montana winters. Beauty doesn't mean anything when the work needs doing. Celeste's expression hardened. Is that what you tell yourself? That looks don't matter? Of course they matter. They've always mattered. And I'm sorry if the truth hurts, but Mr. Mercer wanted me, not you. You were just the decoy father used to steal his money. Then why are you here? Marlowe demanded. If Father already got the money, why would you come all this way? For the first time, Celeste's confidence cracked slightly. Because the arrangement Father had for me fell through, and this is still available. The truth hit Marlowe like a physical blow. You're here because you have nowhere else to go. Your backup plan failed, so you're trying to claim mine. It's not your plan. It was always supposed to be mine. But it isn't anymore, Rhett said. Both sisters turned to look at him. He was watching Celeste with an expression that might have been disgust. You came here thinking what? That I'd be so dazzled by your looks that I'd set aside 4 months of partnership? That I'd throw out a woman who's proven herself 1,000 times over for someone who couldn't even be bothered to show up? I explained. I don't care about your explanations. Rhett moved to stand beside Marlowe, and the gesture felt deliberate, a choice made visible. You're right about one thing. I did pay for you, and when you didn't show up, your father committed fraud by sending someone else. But you know what? That fraud was the best thing that could have happened to me. Celeste's face went pale. Marlo is twice the person you'll ever be, Rhett continued. She works harder, thinks smarter, and doesn't expect the world to bow down to her because of how she looks. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to get back in that wagon and leave my property. And you're going to tell your father that if he sends anyone else to bother us, I'll pursue fraud charges against him that'll make his life very difficult. You can't be serious. Try me. Celeste looked between them, clearly trying to find an angle, some way to turn this around. When she couldn't find one, her expression turned ugly. You'll regret this, she said to Rhett. When you're stuck with someone plain and boring, when you realize what you gave up, get out, Rhett said flatly. Celeste's eyes snapped to Marlo. This won't last. You know that, right? He'll get tired of you. He'll see what I saw the moment I got here, that you're nothing special, just convenient, and when he does, don't come crying to me. I wouldn't dream of it, Marlo said. They watched Celeste climb back into the wagon, her movements jerky with rage. She didn't look back as the driver turned the horses and headed down the road. Marlo stood there, shaking, trying to process what had just happened. You okay? Rhett asked quietly. I don't know. He turned her to face him, hands on her shoulders. Everything she said was bullshit. You know that, right? Do I? Marlo's voice cracked. She's right about one thing. I am plain. I'm nothing special to look at. And you did pay for her, not me. Marlo. I'm not fishing for compliments. I'm just stating facts. She's beautiful, and I'm not. And that matters to most people. It doesn't matter to me. Maybe it should. Rhett's hands tightened on her shoulders. Listen to me. You want to know what I saw when your sister showed up? Marlo didn't answer. I saw someone who's never worked for anything in her life. Someone who expects the world to accommodate her because of how she looks. Someone who wouldn't last a week here because she has no idea what actual hardship looks like. He waited until Marlo met his eyes. And then I looked at you, standing in that garden with dirt on your hands and the sun in your face, and I saw my wife, the real one, the one who matters. You mean that? I don't say things I don't mean. You should know that about me by now. Marlo let out a shaky breath. She really rattled me. I know, but she's gone now, and she's not coming back. How can you be sure? Because she has nothing to gain by coming back, and people like her only do things that benefit them. Marlo leaned into him, pressing her face against his chest. His arms came around her immediately, solid and warm and reassuring. Thank you, she said quietly, for choosing me. Always, Rhett said simply. They stood there in the yard holding each other while the sun climbed higher and the ranch waited for them to get back to work. And Marlo thought that maybe, finally, she'd found the place where she was supposed to be, where she was wanted, where she was enough, exactly as she was. The days after Celeste's visit should have been easier, should have felt like validation, proof that Marlo had actually won something for once in her life. Instead, she found herself watching Rhett more carefully, looking for signs that he might be reconsidering, that maybe her sister's words had planted seeds of doubt. She hated herself for it. They were in the stable 3 days later when Rhett finally called her on it. You're doing it again, he said, without looking up from the saddle he was repairing. Doing what? Watching me like I'm about to change my mind about you. Marlo's hand stilled on the bridle she'd been cleaning. I'm not. Yes, you are. Now he did look at her, expression somewhere between frustrated and concerned. You've been doing it since your sister left. Every time I'm quiet for too long or look at you a certain way, I can see you bracing for me to tell you it was all a mistake. Can you blame me? Yeah, actually I can. He set down the saddle and walked over to her. I told you how I felt. I chose you in front of her. What else do I need to do to prove I'm not going anywhere? I don't know, Marlo admitted. Everyone leaves eventually, Rhett, or they wish they could. I'm waiting for you to realize that you deserve better. Better than what? Better than someone who works as hard as I do? Better than someone who actually gives a damn about this place? Better than someone who didn't run the first time things got hard? His voice was getting louder, frustration bleeding through. What the hell would be better than you? Someone beautiful. Someone who doesn't have dirt permanently embedded under her fingernails. Someone who... Rhett kissed her, cutting off the words. It wasn't gentle. It was fierce and almost angry, like he was trying to force understanding through physical contact. When he pulled back, he said, I don't want someone beautiful. I want you. Those are not separate things in my head anymore. You are what I find attractive. You are what I want. And if you can't get that through your skull, then we're going to have a problem. I'm trying, Marlo said, voice small. Try harder, because I'm getting real tired of competing with the voice in your head that tells you you're not enough. He touched her face, gentler now. You are enough, Marlo. You've always been enough. The problem was never you. She wanted to believe him, desperately wanted to believe that she could have this without it being ripped away eventually. Okay, she said. I'll work on it. Good. He kissed her again, softer this time. Now can we please get back to normal? Because your weird paranoid energy is making me paranoid. That startled a laugh out of her. You're paranoid? About different things, like whether Marcus remembered to check the water system in the east pasture, or whether that storm brewing on the horizon is going to hit us tonight, or whether we have enough supplies to make it through if we get trapped by mud for a few days. Those are legitimate concerns. And you thinking I'm going to suddenly decide I made a mistake is not a legitimate concern. It's just insulting to both of us. He had a point. Marlo took a breath and tried to let go of the fear that had been clawing at her chest since Celeste's wagon had appeared on the horizon. You're right. I'm sorry. Don't apologize. Just stop waiting for disaster. We've got enough real problems without inventing new ones. They finished their work in companionable silence, and Marlo felt something in her chest start to unclench. Maybe Rhett was right. Maybe she needed to stop waiting for everything to fall apart and just let herself have this. The storm Rhett had been worried about hit that night with a vengeance. Not snow this time, it was too late in the season for that, but rain that came down in sheets and turned the ground to soup within hours. Marlo woke to the sound of thunder rattling the windows and Rhett's side of the bed empty. She found him downstairs, already dressed, staring out at the deluge. How bad? She asked. Bad enough. Creek's going to flood if this keeps up, and we've got cattle in the low pasture that need moving before they get trapped. I'll get dressed. No! He turned to face her. It's too dangerous. I'm taking Marcus and Tom. You stay here and... And what? Sit around wringing my hands while you risk your neck? Marlo shook her head. Not happening. I'm coming. Marlo? Don't. We're partners, remember? That means I don't sit inside while you do dangerous things. It means I'm there with you. Rhett looked like he wanted to argue. Then something in his expression shifted, resignation mixing with what might have been pride. You're going to give me gray hair before I'm 40. Probably. Get over it. 10 minutes later, they were mounted and heading into the storm. The rain was so heavy, Marlo could barely see Marcus and Tom riding ahead of them. Lightning split the sky, turning everything stark white for a second before plunging back into darkness. Stay close, Rhett shouted over the wind, like she'd be anywhere else. They reached the low pasture to find it already flooding. The creek had jumped its banks, and water was spreading across the grass at an alarming rate. The cattle were bunched together on higher ground, but it wouldn't stay high for long. We need to move them now, Marcus yelled, before they panic. Easier said than done. Moving cattle in good weather was tricky. Moving them in a storm while floodwater rose around them was asking for disaster, but they didn't have a choice. Marlo urged her horse forward, circling around to help push the herd toward higher ground. The cattle were spooked, eyes rolling white, some of them already making that low bellowing sound that meant they were close to stampeding. Easy, she called, keeping her voice as calm as possible. Easy now. A bolt of lightning hit close enough that Marlo felt the electricity in the air. Her horse shied hard, and she barely kept her seat. The cattle scattered, panic overriding whatever tenuous control they'd established. Damn it! Rhett was fighting to keep his own horse under control. Tom, circle left. Marcus, right. We need to contain them before they run themselves into the flood. They worked in tandem, 4 riders trying to control 100 panicked animals in the dark and rain. Marlo's hands were numb on the reins, her clothes soaked through, but she kept moving, kept pushing, Slowly, painfully, they got the cattle moving in the right direction, up the slope, away from the rising water, toward pasture that would keep them safe. They were almost clear when Marlowe heard it, a crack like a gunshot, followed by a scream that was distinctly human. She whipped around and saw Tom on the ground, his horse bolting away in terror. A branch from a lightning-struck tree had fallen, catching him across the shoulders and pinning him in the mud. "Tom!" Marcus was already riding toward him, but the cattle were between him and the fallen hand. If he pushed through, he'd spook them again, risk another stampede. Marlowe didn't think, just reacted. She drove her horse straight toward Tom, cutting through the edge of the herd, ignoring the cattle that veered dangerously close to kicking. She reached him in seconds, threw herself off her horse, and grabbed the branch. It was heavier than it looked, way heavier. "I've got you," she told Tom, who was conscious but clearly in pain. "Just hold on." She pulled, putting her back into it, and the branch shifted slightly. Not enough. Then Rhett was there, dismounting in one fluid motion, grabbing the other end of the branch. Together, they lifted it enough for Tom to drag himself clear. "Can you ride?" Rhett asked. Tom tested his arms, wincing. "Yeah, nothing broken, I think." "Then let's get the hell out of here." They got Tom back on his horse and finished moving the cattle to safety. By the time they made it back to the ranch, all four of them were exhausted, soaked, and running on pure adrenaline. Mrs. Hadley took one look at them and started barking orders. "Tom, you're going to the doctor. Don't argue. Marcus, get him there. You two." She pointed at Rhett and Marlowe. "Get inside and get dry before you catch your deaths." Nobody argued with Mrs. Hadley when she used that tone. Marlowe peeled off her soaked clothes and stood under hot water until she could feel her fingers again. When she came downstairs, Rhett was in the kitchen, 2 cups of coffee already poured. "Tom's going to be okay," he said. "Bruised, but nothing serious." "Good." "That was stupid what you did." Marlowe looked up sharply. "Excuse me?" "Riding through the herd like that. You could have been trampled." "So could you when you followed me." "That's different." "How is that different?" "Because—" Rhett stopped, jaw working. "Because if something happened to you, I don't know what I'd do." The admission hung between them, raw and honest. Marlowe set down her coffee and moved closer. "Nothing happened to me. I'm fine. We're fine. This time." He pulled her against him hard enough that she could feel him shaking. "Don't do that again. Don't risk yourself like that." "I'm not going to promise that. Not when it means standing by while someone else might get hurt." "Marlowe, no." She pulled back enough to look at him. "You don't get to tell me to stay safe while you run into danger. That's not how this works. We're partners. That means we face things together, even the scary things, especially the scary things." Rhett looked at her for a long moment, something complicated working across his face. Then he said, "I love you." Marlowe's breath caught. "What? I love you. I'm in love with you, and the thought of losing you makes me feel like I can't breathe." He touched her face, fingers gentle despite the intensity in his eyes. "So yeah, I'm going to worry when you do reckless things, and I'm probably going to try to keep you safe even when you don't want me to, because that's what happens when you love someone." "You love me," Marlowe repeated, like saying it out loud would make it more real. "Yeah, I do." She kissed him, putting everything she felt into it. When they broke apart, she said, "I love you too, in case that wasn't obvious." "It wasn't, actually. You're hard to read sometimes." "So are you. Guess we'll figure each other out eventually." "Guess so." They stood there in the kitchen, holding each other while the storm raged outside, and Marlowe felt something fundamental shift inside her. This was real. This was hers. And maybe, finally, she could let herself believe it would last. The weeks that followed were good ones. Better than good. The ranch prospered as summer took hold. Cattle fattening on good grass, horses thriving, the whole operation running with the kind of efficiency that came from people who knew what they were doing and worked well together. Marlowe fell into a rhythm she'd never experienced before. Working hard during the day, falling into Rhett's arms at night, waking up next to someone who wanted her there. It felt almost too good to be real, like she'd stumbled into someone else's life by accident, but it was real. And it was hers. She caught herself smiling for no reason sometimes, humming while she worked, feeling light in a way she'd never felt before. like some weight she'd been carrying her entire life had finally been lifted. Marcus noticed. "You're happy," he said one afternoon, apropos of nothing. They were mending fence together, and Marlo had been singing under her breath without realizing it. "I am," she admitted. "Good. Boss is happy too. Didn't think I'd ever see that, to be honest. He wasn't happy before?" "He was content. Content with his work, with what he'd built. But happy?" Marcus shook his head. "That's different. That's what he is now." "Because of me?" "Because of you," Marcus confirmed. "You're good for him, good for this place. Don't let anyone tell you different." Marlo felt her eyes prickle with emotion. Marcus wasn't prone to sentiment, which made his words carry more weight. "Thank you. Just stating facts." He hammered in another post. "Besides, I like having someone around who actually knows how to keep books properly. Boss was a disaster at it." That made her laugh. Summer moved toward fall, and Marlo started thinking about the future in ways she'd never let herself before. About next year and the year after that. About building something that would last. She was in the garden one afternoon harvesting vegetables for dinner when she heard horses approaching. Multiple horses and the sound of wheels on the road. Her first instinct was wariness. Unexpected visitors had never brought good news before. But when she looked up, she saw it was a family from one of the neighboring ranches. The Callahans. She'd met them briefly at a supply run to town a few weeks back. Sarah Callahan climbed down from the wagon, smiling. "Hope we're not intruding. We were passing by and thought we'd stop to say hello." "Of course not." Marlo wiped her hands on her apron. "Come in. I'll put coffee on." By the time Rhett came in from wherever he'd been working, the kitchen was full of people. Sarah and her husband James, their 3 kids running around outside, and Marlo playing hostess like she'd been doing it her whole life. She caught Rhett's expression as he took in the scene. Surprise, followed by something that looked almost like contentment. "James," he said, shaking the other man's hand, "didn't expect to see you today." Sarah wanted to visit. Something about the ladies around here needing to stick together. James grinned. "You know how it is." "I'm learning," Rhett said, and his eyes found Marlo's across the room. The visit was easy, comfortable. Sarah was warm and funny, with none of the judgment Marlo had learned to expect from other women. She asked about the ranch, about how Marlo was settling in, and seemed genuinely interested in the answers. "It's not easy out here," Sarah said at one point, "especially for women, but you seem like you're managing well." "I like the work," Marlo said honestly. "It's hard, but it's satisfying." "That's good. Some women never adjust. They expect frontier life to be romantic or exciting, and then reality hits them." Sarah paused. "But you're not like that, are you? You knew what you were getting into." "Not exactly," Marlo admitted, "but I learned fast." After the Callahans left, Rhett found Marlo in the kitchen cleaning up. "That was good," he said. "What was?" "Having people here, seeing you with them." He leaned against the doorframe. "You fit, Marlo. Not just with me or the ranch, but with this whole life. This whole world." "I'm trying to." "You're succeeding." He moved closer. "And I want you to know, this is permanent for me. This life we're building. You and me and this ranch. It's not temporary. It's not until something better comes along. This is it." Marlo's throat felt tight. "You're sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." She believed him. Finally, completely, she believed him. Fall arrived with cooler temperatures and the massive undertaking of preparing for another winter. But this time, Marlo wasn't facing it alone or uncertain. She was facing it as part of a team, as someone who belonged. They worked together to stockpile supplies, reinforce buildings, prepare for the harsh months ahead. The hands followed Marlo's organizational systems without complaint now, and several of them had started coming to her with questions before going to Rhett. "You've become essential around here," Mrs. Hadley observed one day. "Don't think that hasn't been noticed." "I just do what needs doing." "That's exactly why you're essential." Mrs. Hadley patted her hand. "Some people are all talk. You're all action. That's rare." One evening in late October, Marlo and Rhett were sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and red. The air was crisp, promising frost overnight, and Marlo had wrapped herself in one of Rhett's old jackets. "I've been thinking," Rhett said. Dangerous. He smiled. About expanding, adding another barn, maybe increasing the herd. We've had a good year and we could support more. That's ambitious. Yeah, but I think we could do it. He looked at her. If you want to. Why wouldn't I want to? Because it means more work, more responsibility, more risk. Marlo considered it. A year ago, she would have been terrified of taking on more, of reaching for something bigger. But now, let's do it, she said. Let's build something even bigger. Rhett's smile was genuine, reaching his eyes in a way that still made her heart skip. Okay then, we'll start planning after winter. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky darken. And Marlo thought about how far she'd come from that terrified girl on a wagon, heading toward an uncertain future with a man who didn't want her. Now she was sitting beside a man who loved her, planning a future that felt solid and real. She'd gone from being the unwanted daughter to being the heart of something that mattered. Thank you, she said quietly. Rhett looked at her. For what? For giving me a chance, even when you didn't want to. Best decision I never meant to make, he said. Then more seriously, thank you for staying, for not giving up when things were hard. Where else would I go? Anywhere. You could have demanded I send you back, or send you somewhere else. But you stayed and fought for this. It was worth fighting for? Yeah, Rhett agreed. It was. The first snow fell in early November, light and almost pretty, nothing like the brutal storms that would come later. Marlo stood in the yard and watched it fall, feeling peaceful in a way she'd never felt before. She had a home. She had purpose. She had love. She'd spent her entire life being told she wasn't enough, that she'd never measure up to her sister or anyone else's expectations. And she'd believed it, had internalized it so deeply that it became her truth. But standing here, in this place she'd helped build and maintain, with a man who valued her for exactly who she was, Marlo finally understood something fundamental. She'd never been the problem. The people who couldn't see her worth, they were the problem. Her family's blindness, their cruelty, their inability to recognize value that didn't come wrapped in a pretty package. That was their failure, not hers. She was strong. She was capable. She was worthy of love and respect and all the good things she'd stopped believing she deserved. And she was done apologizing for existing. Rhett came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. You okay? Better than okay, Marlo said. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Good, because I'm not letting you go anywhere. Promise? Promise. They stood there in the falling snow, two people who'd found each other by accident and built something real through choice and effort and stubborn determination. And Marlo knew with absolute certainty that she was finally home. Winter came in hard that year, like it was testing them one more time to see if they'd break. But Marlo had survived one Montana winter already, and she'd learned something important. You didn't survive by fighting the cold. You survived by respecting it, preparing for it, and refusing to let it make you small. The ranch operated like a well-oiled machine now. Everyone knew their role, trusted each other to handle their part, and the whole operation ran with an efficiency that made Marlo proud every time she thought about it. This was what she'd helped build. Not alone, never alone, but her fingerprints were all over it. She was in the kitchen one morning in late December, going over supply lists with Mrs. Hadley, when Marcus knocked on the door. Boss wants you in his barn, he said. Something about the new calf. Marlo grabbed her coat and followed him out into the bitter cold. She found Rhett in the far stall, crouched next to a calf that was too small and shaking despite the blankets wrapped around it. Premature, Rhett said without looking up. Mother rejected it. Been trying to get it to take a bottle for the past hour. Marlo knelt beside him and studied the calf. Weak, definitely, but there was fight in its eyes. She'd seen that look before, in horses, in cattle, in her own reflection during those first brutal weeks at Raven Spur. Let me try, she said. Rhett handed over the bottle and moved back to give her space. Marlo positioned herself carefully, speaking softly to the calf, letting it get used to her presence. She didn't force the bottle into its mouth, just held it close and waited. It took 15 minutes, but eventually the calf's instincts kicked in and it started nursing. Weak pulls at first, then stronger as it figured out what it was doing. How do you do that? Rhett asked. Do what? Get animals to trust you so fast. Marlowe kept her attention on the calf, making sure it was actually swallowing. I don't rush them. I let them come to me when they're ready. That's simple? That's simple. Most people don't have the patience for it. She felt Rhett's hand on her shoulder, warm even through the layers of clothing. Good thing I found someone with patience then. The calf survived, which felt like a victory. They named it Scrapper because it had fought for every breath, and Marlowe took over its care personally. She fed it every few hours, kept it warm, and monitored it obsessively until she was sure it was going to make it. You're going to spoil that animal, Mrs. Hadley observed one evening, watching Marlowe prepare another bottle. Maybe, but it deserves to be spoiled. It earned it by refusing to die. You see yourself in it, don't you? Marlowe paused. Is it that obvious? To anyone paying attention, Mrs. Hadley's expression was kind. You were like that when you got here, small and shaking and rejected by the people who were supposed to care for you. But you fought. And look at you now. Marlowe felt her throat tighten. I had help. I couldn't have done it alone. Maybe not. But you did the fighting. Nobody could do that part for you. Mrs. Hadley patted her arm. I'm proud of you, child, in case nobody said that to you before. Nobody had. Not once in Marlowe's entire life had anyone told her they were proud of her. She set down the bottle and hugged Mrs. Hadley, surprising both of them. The older woman laughed and hugged her back, fierce and warm. All right. Don't go getting emotional on me. We've got work to do. But she was smiling when she said it. Christmas came around again, marking a full year since Marlowe had arrived at Raven's Spur. The contrast was staggering. Last year she'd been uncertain and afraid, trying to figure out if she had a place here. This year, she was planning the celebration, organizing supplies, inviting the neighboring ranches to join them for dinner. You're sure about this? Rhett asked the night before. That's a lot of people. We have the space, and I want to do it. Marlowe looked at him. I want to show them what we've built here, what you've built. And I want to celebrate that we made it through another year. We made it through together. Exactly. That's worth celebrating. The dinner was loud and chaotic and perfect. 3 neighboring families showed up, plus all the ranch hands, plus Mrs. Hadley and her husband. The house was packed to bursting, and Marlowe moved through it with confidence she couldn't have faked a year ago. She caught fragments of conversation as she passed. Best run operation I've seen in years. She's transformed this place. Mercer got lucky when that sister didn't show up. Marlowe found Rhett in a corner, talking to James Callahan about expanding his herd. When he saw her, he excused himself and pulled her close. Having fun? He asked. Surprisingly, yes. You? I hate crowds, but watching you in your element makes it worth it. My element is ranch work, not hosting parties. Your element is making things work that shouldn't work, whether that's a difficult horse, a stubborn rancher, or a house full of people who need feeding. He kissed her forehead. You're good at impossible things. Later that night, after everyone had left and they were cleaning up, Rhett pulled a small box from his pocket. I got you something, he said. Marlowe dried her hands on a towel. You already gave me gifts last year. This is different. She opened the box and found a ring. Simple gold band, nothing fancy, but solid and real. I know we're already married legally, Rhett said, and she could hear the nervousness in his voice. But that marriage was arranged by other people. He took the ring and held it up. This is me choosing you, asking you to choose me. Not because of contracts or money or anything else, just because we want to be together. Marlowe's vision blurred with tears. Rhett, I love you, Marlowe. I want to spend the rest of my life building things with you. And I want you to wear this ring knowing that you're not here by accident. You're here because I want you here, because I can't imagine my life without you in it. Yes, Marlowe said, voice breaking. Yes, I choose you. I've been choosing you for months. He slid the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly. Then he kissed her, and Marlowe felt something settle deep in her chest. This was real. This was forever. And she wasn't afraid of it anymore. The new year brought challenges, the way New Year's always did. A harsh cold snap in January that tested every system they'd put in place. A sick horse in February that required round-the-clock care. Supply shortages in March that forced creative problem-solving. But they handled it, together. Marlowe noticed that people in town had started treating her differently. The storekeeper greeted her by name now, asked about the ranch, sometimes asked her opinion on things. Women who'd previously ignored her stopped to chat. Men tipped their hats when she passed. She'd earned respect, and it felt different from anything she'd experienced before. This wasn't respect based on beauty or charm or manipulation. This was respect earned through competence and consistency, and showing up day after day to do the work. "You've become someone important around here," Sarah Callahan told her one afternoon when they'd met in town. "People talk about you and Rhett like you're the gold standard for how ranching couples should be." "That seems excessive." "It's true, though. You two actually work together. Most couples around here, the men run things, and the women just exist. But you're partners, real partners. People notice that." Marlowe thought about that on the ride back to the ranch. Partners. That's exactly what they were. Not master and servant, not owner and property, but two people who'd chosen to build something together. Spring arrived with the usual chaos of calving season and fence repairs and 1,000 other tasks that demanded immediate attention. But this year, Marlowe moved through it with confidence. She knew what needed doing, knew how to do it, and trusted her own judgment. One afternoon, she was working on paperwork in the study when she heard horses approaching. Multiple horses, moving fast. She went to the window and felt her stomach drop. Her father's horse. She recognized it immediately, even though she hadn't seen it in over a year. And riding next to him was Celeste, looking furious even from a distance. Marlowe took a breath and walked outside to meet them. Rhett appeared from the barn, saw who it was, and immediately moved to stand beside her. "Marlowe," her father said, climbing down from his horse like he had any right to be here, "we need to talk." "No, we don't." "I'm your father." "You stopped being my father when you sold me to a stranger and took his money." Marlowe's voice was steady, controlled. "You don't get to show up now and pretend you have authority over me." Garrett Bennett's face reddened. "I made a business decision that didn't work out. I'm here to correct it." "How generous of you." "Don't be smart with me, girl. I've secured a proper match for you, a merchant in Kansas City who's willing to overlook your current circumstances." Marlowe laughed, actually laughed. "You think I'm going to leave here to marry some merchant you found? It's a good opportunity, better than wasting away on some ranch in the middle of nowhere." "I'm not wasting away. I'm building something that matters." Celeste finally spoke up. "Oh, please, Marlowe, you're playing house and calling it accomplishment. Everyone knows Red only kept you because you were convenient." "Everyone knows?" Marlowe repeated. "Or just you, because you can't stand that someone chose me over you?" "He didn't choose you. He settled for you. There's a difference." Rhett stepped forward. "Actually, I chose her, very deliberately, and I'll thank you to get off my property before I have you removed." "You can't be serious," Garrett said. "Look at her." He gestured at Marlowe. "Look at what she could have been if she'd had proper opportunities. Instead, she's here, doing manual labor like some common—" "Finish that sentence," Rhett said quietly, "and I'll break your jaw." The threat hung in the air, absolute and believable. Garrett took a step back. "I'm simply trying to help my daughter." "No, you're not," Marlowe interrupted. "You're trying to fix your own reputation, because people found out what you did, and now you're trying to pretend you care. But you don't. You never did." "That's not true." "Yes, it is." And Marlowe found she wasn't angry anymore, just tired. Tired of pretending these people had any power over her. "You know what the funny thing is? You thought you were getting rid of a burden when you sent me here. You thought you were dumping your embarrassing plain daughter on some rancher who wouldn't know the difference. Marlowe, but you didn't get rid of me. You gave me the best gift you ever could have. You sent me to someone who actually saw my value, who appreciated my skills, who loved me for exactly who I am." She looked at Celeste. "And you lost your chance at this life because you couldn't be bothered to show up when it mattered. So thank you, both of you, for being exactly who you are, because it led me exactly where I needed to be." Celeste's face had gone white. "You're pathetic. Pretending to be happy in a life that was supposed to be mine?" "It was never supposed to be yours," Rhett said. "It was always supposed to be hers. I just didn't know it yet." He took Marlowe's hand, and the gesture was deliberate. A statement. "You have 5 minutes to get off my land," he continued. "And if either of you comes back, I'll pursue fraud charges against you, Garrett. That'll tie you up in court for years. And I'll make sure everyone in the territory knows exactly what kind of man you are. You wouldn't dare. Try me." Garrett looked between them, clearly calculating whether this was a fight he could win. He must have decided it wasn't, because he climbed back on his horse. "This isn't over," he said. "Yes, it is," Marlowe replied. "It's been over. You just didn't realize it." They watched her father and sister ride away, and Marlowe felt something break free inside her, some final chain that had been holding her to a past that didn't matter anymore. "You okay?" Rhett asked. "Better than okay. That felt freeing." "Good." He squeezed her hand. "Because you're done with them. We both are." They walked back toward the house, and Marlowe realized she meant what she'd said. She was done letting her family define her worth, done waiting for their approval or acceptance, done letting their rejection hurt her. She'd found her own family, built her own life, and it was better than anything they could have given her. Summer brought the expansion they'd been planning. Construction on a new barn started in June, and Marlowe threw herself into managing the project. She coordinated supplies, scheduled workers, kept track of expenses, and somehow kept the rest of the ranch running smoothly at the same time. "You're a force of nature," Marcus told her one afternoon, watching her direct 3 different crews at once. "You know that? I'm just organized. You're more than that. You're the reason this place runs as well as it does." Marlowe looked around at the ranch, at the new barn taking shape, at the healthy cattle grazing in the distance, at the horses in the pasture, at Rhett working alongside the construction crew because he couldn't stand to just supervise. This was home. Not because of the buildings or the land, but because of what they'd built together. A partnership, a life, a future that belonged to both of them. The barn was finished by late August, and they held a celebration for everyone who'd worked on it. Marlowe stood next to Rhett, accepting congratulations from neighbors and hands and townspeople who'd driven out for the occasion. "You've done something special here," one of the older ranchers told them. "Not many operations run this well, and it's clear that's because of both of you." Later, when everyone had left and they were alone, Rhett pulled Marlowe close. "This is because of you," he said. "All of this. The expansion, the efficiency, the respect we've earned. You did that. We did it together. I built buildings. You built something more important. You built a life worth living." Marlowe felt tears threaten and blinked them back. "I love you. I love you too. More than I thought I could love anyone." They stood there watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors, and Marlowe thought about the girl who'd arrived here barely a year ago. Scared, uncertain, convinced she wasn't worthy of anything good. That girl was gone. In her place was a woman who knew her own strength, who'd learned that worth wasn't about being beautiful or perfect. It was about showing up, doing the work, and refusing to give up even when things got hard. Fall came around again, marking 2 full years since Marlowe had arrived at Raven Spur Ranch. 2 years since she'd been the wrong sister, the unwanted daughter, the embarrassing substitute nobody wanted. Now she was the woman who'd helped transform this ranch into one of the most successful operations in the territory. The woman who people sought out for advice. The woman who'd earned respect through competence and consistency. The woman who'd been loved and chosen every single day by a man who saw her value when others couldn't. "You ever regret it?" Rhett asked one evening as they sat on the porch. "Coming here? Everything that happened?" Marlowe thought about it honestly. "No, because if my family hadn't done what they did, I never would have found this. Found you. Found myself. Even though it was hard. Especially because it was hard. The hard things are what made me who I am." Rhett pulled her closer. "I used to think I was unlucky, that I'd been cheated when you showed up instead of your sister. But I was the lucky one. I got exactly what I needed, even though I was too stupid to see it at first." "We both got lucky," Marlowe said. "We got each other." The winter that followed was their easiest yet, because they'd learned from the previous ones. They were prepared, organized, and experienced. The ranch ran smoothly, and for the first time, Marlowe felt like they weren't just surviving, they were thriving. Word spread throughout the territory about Raven Spur Ranch, about the couple who ran it together, who'd built something remarkable through partnership and hard work. People started seeking them out for advice, wanting to know how they made it work. And Marlowe found herself telling the story sometimes, when asked. Not the pretty version where everything worked out easily. The real version, where she'd been unwanted and scared and had to fight for every inch of respect she'd earned. The thing people don't understand, she told Sarah Callahan one afternoon over coffee, is that being rejected by your family doesn't mean you're defective. It means they couldn't see your value. And that's their loss, not yours. That's a hard lesson to learn. The hardest, but necessary. Marlo looked out the window at the ranch she'd helped build. I spent 20 years believing I wasn't good enough because that's what everyone told me. And then I came here and discovered that I was more than good enough. I was exactly what was needed. I just needed to be somewhere that could recognize it. You've given hope to a lot of women around here, you know. Women who feel trapped or undervalued. They look at you and see what's possible. Marlo felt humbled by that. I just did what I had to do to survive. That's exactly why it matters. You survived and then you thrived. That's powerful. Spring came around once more, bringing with it the familiar chaos and work that Marlo had come to love. She was in the barn one afternoon, working with a young horse, when Rhett found her. "I've been thinking," he said. "Should I be worried?" He smiled. "Maybe. I want to talk about the future." "What about it?" "About expanding again, not just the ranch, our family." Marlo's heart stuttered. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying I want kids with you, if you want them. A family that's actually a family, not whatever disaster your parents created." Marlo thought about it, about raising children here, teaching them the value of hard work and genuine respect, about building something that would last beyond themselves. "Yeah," she said. "I want that too." Rhett's relief was visible. "Good, because I've been terrified to bring it up in case you said no." "Why would I say no to building a life with you?" "I don't know, but I'm glad you didn't." They talked about it more over the following weeks, about what kind of parents they wanted to be, what values they wanted to pass on, how they'd balance ranch work with raising children. And Marlo found herself excited about the future in ways she'd never imagined possible. By summer, Marlo was pregnant. The news spread through the ranch quickly, and everyone seemed genuinely happy for them. Mrs. Hadley cried. Marcus actually smiled, which was rare enough to be noteworthy. The hands started building a crib in their spare time, presenting it to Marlo with gruff affection. "Your family," one of them said simply. "This is what family does." Marlo stood in what would become the nursery, hand on her growing stomach, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. This was what she'd always wanted without knowing how to ask for it. A place where she belonged, where she was valued, where she was loved. The baby was born in early spring, during a thunderstorm that Rhett swore was his daughter, announcing she'd be just as stubborn as her mother. They named her Eleanor, after no one in particular, because this baby deserved a name that was entirely her own. Holding her daughter for the first time, Marlo made a promise. This child would never doubt her worth, would never feel unwanted or second best, would grow up knowing she was loved fiercely and unconditionally. "She's perfect," Rhett whispered, touching Eleanor's tiny hand with a gentleness that still surprised Marlo sometimes. "She really is." "Thank you." Marlo looked at him. "For what?" "For everything. For staying when you could have left. For building this life with me. For her." He gestured at Eleanor. "For proving that the best things in life are the ones you don't plan for." Marlo felt tears slide down her face. "I'm the one who should be thanking you. You gave me a home when I had nowhere to go. You saw value in me when nobody else did. You loved me when I didn't know I was worthy of love. You were always worthy. I just had to catch up." They sat together in the quiet room, holding their daughter, and Marlo thought about how far she'd come. From the unwanted daughter to the woman who'd built something that mattered. From believing she'd never be enough to knowing she was exactly enough. Life at Ravenspur Ranch continued, busier now with a baby but no less purposeful. Eleanor grew, surrounded by people who loved her, learning from an early age that family wasn't just about blood. It was about choice and commitment and showing up for each other. Years passed, marked by growth and challenges and victories large and small. The ranch prospered. Eleanor grew into a confident, curious child who was already learning to ride. Marlo and Rhett built on their success, expanding carefully, always working together. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, Marlo would stand on the porch and look out at everything they'd created, the buildings they'd constructed, the systems they'd refined, the life they'd built from scratch. She'd been the wrong sister, the substitute, the embarrassment. And she turned that rejection into the greatest gift of her life. Because being unwanted by people who couldn't see her value had forced her to find people who could. Being rejected had pushed her toward a life that actually fit. Being the second choice had led her to someone who chose her first, every single day. "What are you thinking about?" Rhett asked, coming out to join her. "About how grateful I am that your plan didn't work out." He laughed. "My plan was terrible. This is so much better." "Yeah," Marlo agreed, leaning into him. "It really is." Because that was the truth nobody told you when you were young and struggling and believing you weren't enough. Sometimes the worst things that happened to you, the rejections, the betrayals, the moments when you felt most unwanted, those were the things that pushed you toward your real life, the life you were supposed to have all along. Marlo had learned that being someone's first choice mattered less than being chosen consistently, that beauty mattered less than character, that proving yourself to people who couldn't see your worth was a waste of time, but proving yourself to people who already believed in you was everything. She'd learned that home wasn't a place you were born into. It was something you built with people who valued you. That family wasn't about blood. It was about showing up, even when things were hard, especially when things were hard. And she'd learned that sometimes the greatest act of defiance was refusing to believe the lies other people told you about yourself, refusing to shrink to fit their expectations, refusing to accept less than you deserved. She'd been called the wrong sister her entire life. But she wasn't wrong. She'd never been wrong. She'd just been in the wrong place, with the wrong people, who couldn't recognize what she offered. And now she was exactly where she belonged, with people who saw her clearly and loved her completely. That was worth more than all the beauty and charm in the world. That was worth everything.